Jim Joyce. How you doing, buddy? That's right. I absolutely love it. Well, I've been home for a couple of weeks. I was on the road, as you know, in most of March. Been home for a couple of weeks, and then heading off to US next week.
It sounds like you're on the move, my friend.
Yeah, and actually been without you, which is so difficult. I'm about to fire your butt.
Jesus. Go on to stay friends.
Well, listen, I definitely miss you and miss discussing digital health with the real you, and would love your thoughts on what's happening in this digital health space these days with all the investments.
So Eugene, great to be contributing to the shot of digital health this week. So in the digital health atmosphere, what am I seeing right now? I think it's wild times. I feel there's a real kind of process of digital health category and companies becoming adults now. I think everyone's really still super excited about the category. But there's just tons of realism out there. So I feel like there's better discussions in digital health than ever before. But there's also there's a real feeling of this category is kind of going through a growing up phase. So anyways, that's my take on how I'm feeling about digital health for the week.
Awesome. Well, and on this note, I'm gonna now let our guest in. Kristian.
Hello.
Hi, Kristian. Where are you?
I'm at our office in San Mateo, California.
Hold on. I can't see you though. Hold on. You are.
How about now?
Perfect. I can see you. I love the background. Welcome to the shot. And as you can see, we have Jim Joyce, but the virtual version of him because he's today. And before I let you in, we actually did a little bit of recording. I've been messing around. It's been pretty fascinating to watch, not just ChatGPT, but things like Midjourney and others. So I actually generated Jim Joyce, the fake Jim Joyce, not the real one. So he's gonna sit and stare at us here. Well, first, and then at the end, he will be the one to ask you the question. So anyway,
awesome.
good to catch up today. Welcome to the shot, as I said, and for all of our millions of listeners and viewers, take us through your life journey. And we got time.
Awesome. Hey, thanks, Eugene. Really appreciate it. Thanks for having me. So yeah, I'm Kristian Ranta. I'm the CEO and founder of Meru Health. And Meru Health, we're an online mental health provider providing holistic, integrative mental health care across the United States, in all states. And yeah, maybe before going into more about Meru Health per se, my personal story, where am I coming from? So I'm from Finland originally, and I started in computer science, did my undergrad and graduate studies in computer science and information systems, and then kind of ended up in healthcare through joining a clinical trials data collection company that was a fast-growing startup back then. And then I worked there for a couple of years for one of the founders, and then actually decided to quit and founded my first own company, which was a medical device company. So I started off in diabetes, glucose monitoring, medical devices. And then, yeah, so that's kind of like my early years, built that company, built another business within that company, spun it off. Eventually sold the first business in 2015 to a Korean public company, and then went into mental health care, founding Meru Health in 2016. And many people ask me, why did you go from diabetes to mental health care?
Yeah.
Well, unfortunately, I lost my oldest brother, Peter, to suicide because of his struggles with mental health, or with depression and with addiction. And that just kind of made me think through, what do I want to do with my life? And I really felt that after that first stint in diabetes, I wanted to move into mental health care. And yeah, that's how I ended up here.
Well, listen, first of all, thank you for sharing that
highly personal story, and I think a lot of us entrepreneurs in healthcare get into the specific healthcare, companies and create these products and services because of our own, experiences. So again, thank you for that. But I do want to rewind a little bit back and, sort of, I think, and this hopefully will also show individuals that while Finland is always listed as top of the list of happy countries, that doesn't mean that everybody is, right? And that there are things that happen to individuals through it. But I'm actually curious, that dichotomy, and maybe talk a little bit about why it does Finland show up as one of the happiest countries.
Yeah, well, that's a funny thing. I mean, like, I think it's the 6th time in a row now that happened again. So I think I don't think it's because Finland would be actually more happier on the upside than many other countries. I think, as an example, other Nordic countries, there's a lot of happy people there, and there's a lot of happy people in other places. But I think one thing that is special in Finland is that there's the downside is limited. Because in Finland, there's pretty much no homeless people. There's government housing for everyone if you're like can't afford a house. There's free healthcare for everyone. There's free education for everyone, tax paid.
Yep.
So the downside is very limited, and there's very little there's of course like some struggle and suffering in Finland as well, but there's like less of like extreme suffering and struggling going on in Finland. So I think that's actually what's lifting the whole thing upwards. And that kind of like, so the elimination of a lot of that
the stress points. Yeah,
exactly. It's making things happier. So,
and then I'd like to sort of keep moving along your journey, and I'm assuming when you went, you started the diabetes company or joined a diabetes company.
Yeah.
Sorry, started, right?
I was one of the co-founders.
One of the co-founders. So I'm assuming in that time is when you met Sridhar, right? Who actually was on the shot as well. Okay. I know you guys both do some angel investments together and other things. So those relations go way back. Now, what made you go into diabetes care then back in the day? Like, what was the trigger there?
Yeah, that's a good question. So one of my buddies, he's a diabetic type 1, and he's an industrial designer. And basically, him and his brother invited me to join an early crew of like an early team of folks that were kind of thinking about a new glucose monitor. And my friend, again, with diabetes, he had this idea of a better glucose monitor. And that's kind of how we started. So that's how I ended up in diabetes, even though my background is more in the IT realm.
And what were, some of the lessons learned, because you were one of the co-founders early on? What were some of the key lessons learned? It also is, I think even back then was already a crowded market, right? So how do you, what did you pick up out of that? Because I think as we transition into Meru in a bit, also while the need is there, pretty crowded market, but let's stick with the diabetes and maybe some of the lessons learned in that crowded space.
Yeah, so there's many things there. One thing, I guess, we were building a new kind of glucose monitor, which solved some of the convenience problems for frequently measuring diabetics. So we had a fully integrated monitor, which included the lancing device, the needle to prick the finger or prick your finger, and then also like a cartridge of test strips for the actual blood testing. So we've had integrated everything into one like really cool looking consumer looking kind of a box, or a case, and it didn't look like a medical device per se. So it was just more like a design and usability and a mechanical innovation. And in that sense, like it had a market with like frequently measuring diabetics, like type 1s and some type 2s who were on insulin, like, I don't know, 10-20% of type 2s. And so we actually found a pretty good niche, which is still a fairly big niche, and we didn't have a lot of competition in that niche. There's CGM for sure and other things, right? But then again, a lot of CGMs weren't that good back then, so a lot of people were using finger pricks, and it's also a lot cheaper and things like this. But I think one kind of an important lesson was that coming from Finland with that company, we were really struggling to raise enough capital to really grow the company. It was, we were we were producing medical devices in China and in Korea. We had like facilities and production partners. So it was just like super capital intensive. And back then Finland didn't like have yet a lot of venture capital. So that was a big struggle for us. Like we just always couldn't, we never could raise enough capital to like really scale the whole business. And eventually that's why we sold it to one of our Korean partners who had like much better scale already. The other thing was that I think kind of communicating the value prop was also not easy because again, people are so used to using the traditional devices and traditional tools that's another another challenge that we also faced in the market. And I think third one would have been the fact that we had our HQ in Finland and in Helsinki, and it was really hard to recruit all the talent that we needed because like Finland just did not have like most of these roles or most of these kinds of people because no one had ever built anything like this out of Finland, so there was just no people in there. So we hired people from other European countries and things like these. So I think that company would have done a much better had we founded it in the US, and that's why I actually eventually like ended up founding Meru Health in the US as a US company.
That was sort of my next question. So let's, would love to sort of transition into the Meru Health journey. Part of the reason why I asked you the question, because I think knowing that I think you're sitting in US now, if I'm not mistaken, right? So you founded the company, majority of the market is in US, but, maybe rewind back. And again, while the company was started out of a personal pain, right? It's also is a very crowded market. Yes, the demand is, I think, increasing even more so than ever before. But maybe just walk us through that journey of founding it, some of those lessons learned already, and then I'll dive in and interrupt rudely as I always do.
Awesome. Yeah. So there's definitely like a few key lessons. So when I came into the mental health care space, I didn't know too much, so I first spent a lot of my time for the first couple of years just talking to reading research, reading like clinical manuals, talking to doctors, talking to professors, and just really wanted to understand like what's working and what is not working in mental health care. And what I found was pretty kind of interesting. Like I came from diabetes, so I knew that like diabetes management, diabetes care, it's like pretty effective, but it's not like that great. Like if you look at the outcomes on a population level, they aren't like really that great, but it was still okay. When I came to mental health care, I realized first of all that access, of course, is like a massive problem. There's like less than half the people who need care. When they need care, they don't get it. Or then that's a struggle. We don't have enough providers, things like these. But I think the other even more fundamental problem is that there's also we're trying to treat mental illnesses in a way that they are merely psychological problems, which they're not. They're also biological, physiological based problems. And that has led us down the path where we try to treat everything with like as a brain disorder or as like a psychological disorder. And that's kind of like, we kind of try to do CBT with everyone, and we try to do like antidepressants with everyone. And that thing, when I looked into the research, what I realized quite quickly was that actually, if you really look at the data, like real world data, like what's actually happening out there with tens of thousands of people in America and in other countries, you can see that therapy works for maybe 40% of people. Like if you have clinical depression or clinical anxiety, maybe 40% of people who do like talk therapy will actually get better and stay better. And then if you look at antidepressants, like if you only get a prescription drug, like any antidepressants, and you go through like several, only like 20 to 30% actually really get better long term, even less than that actually. So I was like so surprised that like, is this the best we have? Like this is the best we have to give people this massive global problem, and we have nothing better. So then I was like, just like even more inspired to dig deeper. And we developed and built Meru Health to be a mind and body integrated intervention that is not just addressing like the psychological aspects, although they're very important aspects. I've done therapy myself, and I benefited tremendously. But we built in CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy, mindfulness, and more like psychological aspects. But we also built in food and mood, which is like a very integral piece. Then sleep hygiene, sleep coaching, because sleep problems affect roughly 90% of people with mental health challenges. Yeah. And then we also like go into some exercise, some yoga, just some recommendations on that side of the equation. And then finally, we built in biofeedback, which is a wearable device for getting instant feedback on deep breathing practices to regulate the nervous system and your stress system. So these are like kind of like the holistic or integrated components that we built into one intervention that is supported by a therapist, by coaches, by care coordinators, even by psychiatrists. And we deliver this as a continuous care solution, as a tech-enabled service, now throughout the country. So that's kind of like our key differentiator, is the mind and body approach. And then I guess, finally, people ask us like, well, is that like, does it really work? Like, is it really good? So we've done a lot of research with Stanford, Harvard, with others, more than 10 published clinical studies, including randomized controlled trials. And it works much better than standard of care. Like, we're seeing 2 to 3 times better results, especially over long term, when we've published our 1-year data already. So what we're seeing is that people actually benefit much more on average against, like, if we want to compare against like standard of care today.
And I appreciate you diving into the differentiation, because if you look on the market, I mean, there are platforms. There's, again, I'm not going to start mentioning the names. I think many of the listeners here know some of quote unquote competition, and everywhere you hear from across the board, different ages, words stressed, I'm feeling anxiety left and right. And then the question becomes, then there's just not enough supply, right? And supply of therapists, I'll just pause there, right? So how's that even working in the marketplace? Because I feel like everybody around has challenges, right? We all do.
Yeah. Important point. So that's one thing we kind of also realized early on, that there's a huge supply problem in the market. And then basically we designed our intervention to be, like I mentioned, like it's a continuous care intervention. And what it actually means is that we don't put that much emphasis on just doing face-to-face calls. So, let's think about it from like first principles. Like, if you are a provider, how many hours a day you have time to work? Maybe like, I don't know, let's say 8 hours. So how many calls can you do in 8 hours? Maybe 6, maybe 7. I don't know. You got to do your notes and everything else in between.
But I would argue and add to it, just sorry to interrupt here, but I would add to it, and we've seen this even with non-clinical coaching, right, at your coach, is this work is so heavy, right? I mean, this is intense work, working with individuals through this process. And I would argue that while, yes, it's a job, yes, you need to, I think stretching those hours and your own, I mean, therapists are also human beings that need a break and need to offload. So I just wanted to interject here a little bit on this, but.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. Like, absolutely spot on, because like it's not feasible for anyone to do like that many a day. So that creates a huge problem. Like, I mean, if you have limited number of providers and there's a huge surge in demand, so there's no way you can meet the demand with the number of providers. Like, I think there's the providers we have today in the US, even including coaches, it's like 300,000, including all the therapists and coaches in the United States. And coaches mean mental health, like wellness coaches that can be mental health, or behavioral health coaches. So it's just like, that's just not enough for anything. Like, that's not even meeting half of the demand. So the problem is there, like we all know it. But we kind of like came at it from a different perspective, where we kind of built this intervention in a way that like there's got to be a way to get people to kind of engage with like content and with practices which will eventually help them change behavior and help them get better, without like doing face-to-face calls every week. Like, that's just not scalable. Like, even if we had only coaches, we have therapists and coaches, but if we only had coaches, that still wouldn't be scalable because there's not enough coaches. So then we kind of designed this different model, which we call the continuous remote care model, where a therapist will work with a patient or with a member on average, like for, roughly 3 hours over the course of our intervention, while being able to have the patient or the member kind of dedicate more than, well, we're now between 12 to 15 hours on average on the patient side. So like us spending like few hours with a therapist will get like additional 12 hours time committed by the patient on average throughout 12 weeks. And this is possible because of like creating a very engaged model where you first meet with your provider and you kind of build that rapport, and then you get a customized plan for your, against your needs, kind of customized by your provider and by the system. And then basically you go through this more of a programmatic curriculum in app, which is gamified, which is like gives you feedback. And then where the same therapist is in the chat, there's a chat in there. So the same therapist is in the chat, like proactively nudging and pinging you, but not spending a lot of time on average.
Right.
Like it could be like 1 minute here, 1 minute there, like 5 minutes there, and just like giving you different kudos and like hearts and thumbs up and things like these against your, different practices or completed mindfulness practices or journaling or CBT, video lessons, things like these. So it's kind of like this immersive experience, which is more like a programmatic or more of productized experience. And we've been able to get this leverage with this model where a provider spends way less time and they can treat a lot more patients. So to give you some numbers, our provider, like full-time equivalent provider, can work with like 120 to 150 simultaneous, like a caseload of 120 to 150. And in normal face-to-face telehealth or brick and mortar setting, that's maybe like 25 to 50. So that's kind of the leverage we're able to achieve. And that's been our approach, like how to tackle this.
And actually curious, because we also get asked this question and have to explain a lot. I think coaching, just the word coaching has meant so many different things in the world, right? There's executive coaching, there's fitness coaching, there's when we refer to health and wellness coaching or behavioral health coaching, we sort of describe this as kind of non-clinical psychotherapy, using some of the similar techniques as therapists do, but again, it's non-clinical. How do you guys look at coaches and how do they work with therapists together?
Yeah, so we actually have like a clear-cut clinical pathway and then a subclinical pathway. What I mean by that, we have a 12-week therapy program, which is led by a therapist and supported by care coordinators and psychiatrists if needed. And then we have a coach-led, like more like a preventative track, more like a resiliency program, which is an 8-week program. And so they're actually like very separate from each other. And our coaches may refer to the therapy program and the therapist may refer to the coaching program, but they don't like work at the same time with the same patient.
Got it. That's interesting because at some point, right, I mean, we kind of always say you need a human being along your health journey, but you need different roles through that journey. And so for lack of a better term, you could graduate to more of a preventative program, maintenance, right, or go into from an escalation perspective.
Exactly.
Awesome. Listen, I'd love to get your thoughts. I mean, there's a lot of stuff going on, yes, in mental health, but also broadly in digital health. And before you joined in, and I let you in, Jim had his own minute or so on it. From market dynamics, investment cycles, kind of where do you see digital health broadly going?
Tough one. I think there's a bit of a backlash now with like the payer thing and like some challenges after the pandemic, after the funding kind of dried up recently or in the recent couple of years, after the big boom. So I think there's some of these challenges, but I think there's like kind of like a separating the wheat from the chaff phenomena going on here.
Yeah.
And what I'm seeing is when I work with the payers or when we work with the payers and employers, it's not that they wouldn't have need for mental health care. Like they actually, and I think you already alluded to this earlier, that they actually have even more need than even, at least as much as they had during the pandemic. We're seeing like a lot of need. But the thing is that they are becoming much more now selective on like what kinds of providers or solutions do they really want to work with. So I think what's happening on a broader basis is that the industry is becoming more realistic and more careful in like not just working with anything and everyone at the same time, which happened during the pandemic. They were just, pretty much like bringing in whatever was available to meet the demand, and just like everyone was a bit of a panic at that time. But now it's becoming more like, hey, let's really like find out like what is really working and what is not working, and let's get rid of what is not working. So I think to some extent, there's this phenomena also like relates to the pair situation. It relates to maybe some of the other things with like, what's been happening with some other providers in the market, some of the Senate or some of the inquiries by the, some of the administrations out there. So, I mean, I think there's going to be this kind of a phenomena going on in the next few years where if you're really good and you're really delivering good care, high quality care at scale, then there's going to be like plenty of work to do. But then again, there are maybe different players that are not so well geared for that. So I think that's going to happen. And then again, the financial market, what's happening? Well, I fairly actively talk to different investors, and I think at least some investors that I've recently talked to are seeing that there's a bit of an improvement in the market conditions now, and there's a bit more appetite for investments. I think the market is like slightly recovering from the worst bottom, maybe a year ago. But it, to be seen what's going to happen. I don't know more about that.
Yeah, listen, I think that's one key thing about human beings, and back to resilience, right? From that perspective, no matter what hits you, we all try to correct, right, the course and stay resilient, and that goes for investors as well, right? I mean, I think there's still quite a bit of dry powder, but some of the fundamentals are starting to play in versus blitzscaling at all costs, right? So no, thank you for that. So look, Jim is now, we're going to try to continue experimenting this. Jim is going to now ask his famous last question of the podcast. So Jim, go ahead.
So Kristian, let's imagine yourself for a moment coming out of, you're in California and you're walking out of a Y Combinator pitch session after you've just you're talking about the amazing success that Meru Health has achieved over the years, and all the young aspiring entrepreneurs from Y Combinator are listening to you, and you see one in the back, and he's eating a piece of fruit, and as you come off the stage, he comes running over to you, and you realize it's a young Finishman, an entrepreneur, and he looks at you and he says, my new mental health digital app technology company has just been accepted into Y Combinator, and I couldn't be more than excited, and I watched your journey. What's that one piece of advice you would give that young version of yourself as they're embarking on their Y Combinator journey? Thanks, Kristian.
Mm-hmm. One piece of advice. I think the biggest learning that I've learned myself during my last 15 years being a founder is that you got to start everything with your values. Like what I mean by that is that, like, when you're founding a company, you're building a team. What I did with Meru Health, what we did with Meru Health with my co-founders, and what I always advise people to do if they're starting their journey is to, in the beginning, like really think through, like, what are your values, what are your founding team's shared values, and what are the ways how you want to work, like what are your like traits and what do you value with people working in your core team, and really clearly like setting those values, and then really like working with the values to adhere and make your decisions based on these values. Like if your value is transparency, then you got to make decisions that support transparency within your organization. Or if your value is like customer first, then you really got to go above and beyond to meet that value of customer first. And I think that was the most fundamental thing, because when I did that with Meru Health versus I had not done that with my earlier ventures, the change has been very, very positive. I mean, there's a very cohesive and clear culture at Meru Health where we, work with our values, and they're like very, very well known and appreciated by our people. And we use these values as kind of reflectors for our decision making and how we treat other people, how we work together, what do we value, who gets hired, who gets fired, things like these.
Yeah.
So I think that's extremely important because it creates so much cohesion, and with cohesion you create so much more momentum, and you can penetrate through like even brick walls, whatever, if you really have a great like aligned team that is working towards the same goals with the same values.
Kristian, thank you very much, and thank you for talking to a robot Jim, by the way. I don't know what your experience was. We didn't even get to some of those topics, but that was me messing around, and we are meticulously unproduced. So you know, here it is. But listen, I appreciate your time. This was fun for me, and for our listeners and viewers, hit subscribe, pass it on, and see you next week.
Thanks so much.